right, everybody, we are back here on the Workforce Disrupted podcast. Today, I am joined by James Gross of Variance. And James, funny story how we connected. We connected through my buddy, who is also your former coworker, Avi Mash. And he said great things. He said, you got to get James on the podcast. He's got a really cool trajectory. Obviously, your experience at Variance, but prior to that at Percolate and tons of other stops on the way, all thinking through marketing, through sales, and pumped to connect with you today here on Workforce.
Thanks, Danny. I'm pumped to be here.
Awesome. So we'll jump right in. Would love to hear before we get started with the specifics. Who is James Gross? Tell us about you and your formative years.
Sure. Yeah. I came from a big family. I'm one of 8 kids. There's 4 girls and 4 boys. We kind of moved all around the United States. I got a very good sense of the country. I was born in Philadelphia, lived in Houston, Texas for 6 years, lived in Westbrook, Maine for 7 years, moved to Southern California when I was just getting into high school. And then, moved to the Bay, moved to New York City. And now I live with my 3 kids and my wife in San Diego, California. Oh, yeah. So just in terms of formative, and I think for your audience, which is an audience that I just really admire and I can't wait to see sort of grow up. I was very passionate, very, very actually influenced by a movie while I was in college called Triumph of the Nerds. And it was a movie basically that was created in the 90s that documented Silicon Valley. And being in college at the time, coming from a big family, coming from pretty basically lower to middle class upbringing, one thing I was always kind of concerned about in my collegiate years was like, how would I get ahead? How would I create a great career? And I watched this movie, and this movie taught me that one, technology generally moves in cycles, and two, actually you could get ahead by trying to understand those cycles and being on the front end of those cycles. And by being an entrepreneur, by basically trying to understand something that other people didn't understand, and just being ambitious and creative and trying to explain this new world to people and building things around it. And again, as someone that didn't come up, I didn't go to a great school, I didn't have any money. I thought, okay, this is how I could get ahead. It was about salesmanship. It was about understanding a future that potentially people didn't understand, being early, being curious, and having grit and ambition. And so that movie had a huge impact on my life. And so when I got out of college, I didn't actually go to my graduation. I moved immediately to Silicon Valley and said, I'm going to become an internet entrepreneur in 2005. Unfortunately, that you just can't become an internet entrepreneur. You need to have connections and know people. So I ended up, kind of going to work for a Hispanic newspaper, selling Spanish language advertising in the Bay Area in San Francisco. But eventually, I was able to get and run and have more of an entrepreneurial career. But yeah, I think for your audience and in terms of my formative years, that movie had a huge impact on me. And for anyone out there, my takeaway was you don't have to go to the best school, you don't have to come from money, but what you're looking for is that wedge, that opportunity where you think you can be uniquely great and uniquely ambitious, and yeah, just believing in yourself and going for it.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to check out that movie because it sounds great, and I haven't seen it yet. And two, I think that's true. I mean, in tech for sure, you don't need to be the number one coder in the entire world to be great in tech. You need to just have a perspective, find your niche, and really crush it. And I love what you were saying about being an entrepreneur, being creative, getting ahead of a cycle, and showing your perspective on it. And I think those are all true things. I've been in tech for 10, 11 years now. And I think all of those things are fundamentally true, which is great. And big family. Which order did you fall in?
I was number 5.
Number 5.
So yeah, basically just, by that time, probably what was great about being a middle child of a big family is you could kind of do whatever you want. It seemed like oftentimes the the attention would go towards the poles, and the middle ones could kind of roam free, which I appreciated. I liked being on my own.
That's nice. That is true. I'm one of three, so not as big of a family, but yeah, you're under the microscope as the oldest. So there's many benefits as the oldest too, but you're definitely under the microscope. So jumping in more to the workforce, and I know you have thoughts here. What do you think is important when considering how people are going to work in the future? The future of work is the tagline, but what's going to be important?
Well, I think for younger people, the most amazing thing is, I think arguably the most interesting thing that's happened in my career is the internet, right? The internet is just this incredible force that has changed the world so much. And for what I'm so excited for with young people and the future of work is just we are also living through this now great shift to the idea that for so many jobs, the potential to work remote is very real now, and the potential to have true autonomy and it is very real in your work. And so I just think we're simply starting over in a way. And I think I like to say it a lot, but this child's mind mentality towards work is one that I think you need. And so I think for people coming up in their careers, um, I think it's about what they need to define it, and we need to ultimately learn from them because they're going to be the first generation. Just like I think you and I, Danny, were probably the first generation that sort of grew up a little bit with the internet. This generation is going to grow up with a very different view on what work is and the boundaries around it and the way things get done. And so it's incredibly exciting because whenever you have change, I think you have the ability for there to be a lot of new leaders and a lot of new rules to be written.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment as well. And curious to know your thoughts on this, a little off of what you were just saying. So we get an interesting view at Ramped of folks who are coming back online and requiring folks to be in office and folks who aren't. And I don't know the right answer. I don't know if there's going to be a winner or a loser there. Do you have a perspective on that? And as it pertains to this kind of work remote or work on your own type of environment, do you think we're going to start to see companies all offer hybrid, companies offer work from from anywhere always, or just a full shift back to the office?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not. I guess so. With the company I've started now, the first company I started, we were in office company. We had hundreds of employees in very large headquarters in New York and California, and even in London, in Europe. And with our new company that we've started, Variance, even this was pre-COVID, we were going to be remote first. It's a more technical company, more technical product. We believe deeply in like documenting our culture through the written word and through other ways that basically you didn't have to be in the office. At the time, the remote concept was still a little bit contrarian, right? 99% of all companies were not remote. We were doing something that other companies had definitely pioneered, but we were still in the great minority. Now it seems almost contrarian to say you're going to go back to the office, right?
Right.
Given we're still living through a global pandemic. But I do believe that remote is the future, because the world should be more interconnected. People should have more opportunity, and the urban centers are just simply unaffordable for the great majority of the greatest talent in the world that lives somewhere
Yep.
else. And now we can have the tools and the operational horsepower to put this in play in many respects because of how much we've been able to accelerate adoption with COVID. So yeah, and I'm very concerned about hybrid. Actually, I think hybrid has the potential to do way more harm than good, in the classic state of the political nature, the politics that can occur in companies, and the ability to write rules that make sense for everyone when you're trying to build a fair environment, an equitable environment. So I think I see way too much hybrid talk that ultimately, to me, looks like a very big nightmare to actually execute on.
Yeah, yeah,
Sounds good
it
though.
sounds good. I would say, I'm seeing that play out in real life right now. So, we just brought on our first few employees. They are scattered throughout the country, and frankly, I'm nearly certain pre-COVID we would not have met any of them or even hired any of them. Just shows you, which I've always believed, but growing up in the Midwest and being sort of like a, whatever you want to call it, an immigrant to the West Coast, immigrant to
Hmm.
Silicon Valley at some point, it was great talent can come from anywhere, and it doesn't just mean because you're located in Silicon Valley that you are better or worse. So I think I'm seeing that too play out as like great talent comes from anywhere. Remote is the future, and folks who are not ahead of the curve may fall behind. I don't know. I don't have a strong perspective quite yet, but it's formalizing in my head for
Yeah, and I just to play your role back to you there. Like I think one of the more exciting things for people in their careers right now is, remember, we used to go west. I mean, the California used to be the frontier. It started in the, even pre-gold rush, right? Where ultimately a lot of creative individuals were trying to get away from Edison and the fact that Edison had patents over so much of the visual technologies that creative individuals wanted to use to make things like motion films. And so they escaped basically to California, where Edison couldn't impose his patents because they're too far away. And so these creative, Muirbridge could build the gallivanting horse and everything, not having to worry about this sort of big brother General Electric coming down and squashing them. We continue to move west, from things like Wall Street, and still California was this affordable place where dreams could be thought of and won. California, unfortunately, is not like that anymore. You look at housing prices. You look at a young person starting their career. They're not going to. It's almost nearly impossible to tell them to move to California with the housing
yeah.
prices, right? And so now, though, the frontier really seems to be the digital world, right? This idea that we can live anywhere, and ultimately, where we make our mark is not to be Leland Stanford driving in the stake of the end of the Transcontinental Railroad in California. It's this idea that anyone can work from anywhere on this huge meta frontier, which is the internet. And I think that's so exciting, because you hear young people get downtrodden by the idea of, oh, I have to move to California, I've got to start paying $2,500 a month in rent. Hopefully, the answer to that is no,
Yeah.
because that's not fair.
Yep. Yep. Fully agree. Frankly my experience when I moved out to California in 2012 was, hey, coming from Chicago, a great place in Chicago, and paid, relatively cheap rent, and move out to SF and got a terrible place and paid way too much for it. And it was just like every paycheck was just like, oh my God, I'm just eating this to be here, which
Yeah.
is crazy. But I mean that brings up another point is why do you feel like today, especially, and could be COVID induced, could be other things, but why are people, and I think it was even prior to COVID, like the last 3-4 years, why are people obsessing over the future of work today?
I think part of it is just because, like you're saying, I mean, again, the COVID brings on this great reshift in where we live, and where we can work from we live. But again, the cracks were already in place before, because you could see the transformations happening inside of companies based on the technologies that we're now using. And really, the question you could ask as a in a child's mind is like, why are we working this way if this is available to us? And so I think even before COVID, the reason why people would obsess on it, because there's a better way to work. There's no question. And now what COVID helped was just, let's accelerate that. Um, and so, it's just, COVID accelerated inevitability. And I think for younger people, they know that there's better ways, and they're going to get to inevitability faster than older generations will.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's very straightforward. Going back to an earlier point, how do you think technology will impact the inequality gap, or, rent at a low level, or how people decide where to live, any of that?
Well, I mean, again, I should preface that I'm a huge believer in technology, and I'm very much an optimist on how technology can improve the quality of lives. And so, what I would say is technology is a incredible driver of equality. And maybe I'll take kind of two macro points on that. One is, you look at deflationary items, cost items versus inflationary cost items, right? There's a fantastic chart that's out there that shows basically almost anything that technology can really touch. That could be, things like televisions, automobiles, phones, all that. when technology can really, in more of an open market, can really touch those things, the cost crater, basically, they're incredibly deflationary, right? Where technology, it can't touch things as much, mostly because of regulated environments. The three big things in America would be healthcare, education, and housing. Are three areas where you could say, where's the technology, so to speak, in those processes? Those are incredibly inflationary, meaning those are getting more expensive in our lifetimes and can continue to. So on one area, I would say I would try to argue that technology is a deflationary force. It's going to drive costs down, and that ideally creates a more equitable society. The second thing would be just, if you could take a broader macro view, and again, this is where it's not as much a US view, but the global view. We are living through really the greatest boom in pulling people out of poverty in any lifetime, right? So billions of people are living in more urbanized environments, whether that's villages or larger cities, and they're coming out of deep poverty, right? In a lot of areas, mostly areas like India and Africa and even China. And so, and a lot of that is brought on by globalization, of course, which again has positives and negative externalities. But it's also brought on by technology, by the idea that people are connected. They can potentially work in other areas. They can be more connected to, a global GDP, global workforce type thing. So yeah, I will. I'll die in the stake about the idea that technology can really drive equality versus inequality.
Yeah, that is a good perspective, and it's curious to me why folks, I guess it's maybe a human nature thing now that I'm even saying it out loud, go to the negative, right? They see the negatives of technology, which is this massive equity gap, if you want to call it, their inequality gap. However, they don't look at the, which you mentioned, right? More folks now than ever are coming out of poverty. They look at, yeah, we're good, but we may see a trillionaire, a couple trillionaires, several trillionaires in our life. And we also see folks that are just struggling to make rent. So I think they look at that and assess technology and just say technology bad versus, hey, technology is, would you actually want to be alive, 70, 80, 90, 100 years back where you didn't even have basic things like, not even let alone computers, but basic medicine and stuff like that, where you don't have to worry about it today. Like, we've improved our lives significantly.
Yeah, one last plug would just be, we're literally, it's very hard to even wrap your heads around it, but you can imagine the way history will hopefully look at it. The work done with the vaccines that have come out, mostly out of America, with the innovative structures of how companies like Moderna and even the work of Pfizer can be set up. These are literally world-changing vaccines that in effect saved millions of lives, will continue to save millions of lives. And we just sort of take it for granted a little bit. But you can study past pandemics and understand that they were far worse. And
Yep.
and the fact that these vaccines are effectively free and hopefully going to be available to the entire world in time is really, really incredible, and a testament to just to wave the flag for capitalism. Like, these were done in markets that allowed them to be done, and we should be proud of the work that's been done in America in order to make that happen.
Yep. Restrictions moved away in rare form to make them happen and make them happen with speed. So I think I would agree. I think much more good than bad. Switching gears a little bit. So obviously you work on the forefront of empowering salespeople. There's several other entities and organizations within any big company, but what do you feel like will be in the future automated away from companies, and where does the automation stop? What roles, what orgs within a company are here to stay forever?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And again, I personally, just to maybe defend the salesperson, what I'll say up front is I don't think sellers are going away. I've been working now for about 20 years. Every year, someone tells me how they've automated the sales process, and you no longer need a seller. And I smile and listen. But I think to to take the adage from Bezos, and maybe just to not to plug Variance, but to plug how I think about building a company. Jeff Bezos has a famous saying, which is like, if you want to make money, of course you have to understand what's going to change. But if you want to make a lot of money, it's actually more important to understand and to bet on what's not going to change.
Yeah.
And in the case of Amazon, of course, what he realized was things were moving into a much more of a digital e-commerce environment. But what didn't change were the fact that people wanted low prices, and they wanted convenience, and they wanted to be considered the most important part of the buying process. And Bezos has nailed that. I mean, there's no question that Amazon offers low prices, convenience, and puts the customer first. And if you think about it, like that's why they really win. And so that idea of not changing is very important for anyone in their career to think about. Like, as much as it is important to think about what's changing, what's not going to change. So my pitch there is sales is not going away. Sellers are incredibly valuable to the economy, the world, and I don't think you're going to automate them out. What can you automate? To your question, actually, there's a lot in the term variance. Just to tell you a little bit about that term. So you can put all work on a spectrum. Basically, if you were to lay out exactly what people do in a day, you could put all that work on a spectrum. And on one end, you would have low variance, and on one end, you'd have high variance. Low variance work would be work where you want things to be that are highly repetitive, and you want them to come out exactly the same. So let me give you an example. Like when you build a jet engine, and that thing's coming off the factory line, you want it exactly to spec to how you designed it. Because of course, if you don't make it exactly to spec, it could fall off the side of the plane, and you can't have that happen, right? And so what you'll hear is like, oh, well, that thing is exactly precise to like 6 sigma, like what it was meant to be. So like 6 decimal places, exact, precise, coming off that factory line. So anything that's built in that world has low variance. On the other end would be high variance work. So on the low end, think of like manufacturing as low variance. Every widget off the factory line, exactly the same. Mm-hmm. On the high end of variance would be every single time you build something, it's different. So think of like research and development. Think about Moderna with the vaccine. The entire intent of the majority of work they're doing is they're trying to discover, and they're trying to invest in things that will come out differently than what they are currently doing today. So all work can be like that, right? On the low end, you have 6 sigma manufacturing. On the high end, you have like literally, here's $1, Danny. Don't come back until you have something different. And so on one way to think about it is, on the lower end of variance, you should always be looking to automate, because you want processes to be exact, and that's where machines, that's where code, that's where all these things are very good at saying like, oh, we can automate this. On the high end though, high end of variance, the 100% variance, the 90% variance, you want humans, because humans have brains. And as much as we don't understand them, what we know about being a human is we can be creative. We can take connections, we can draw, in our brain, we can start to see where this influences that. So let me think about creating, something else, right? And the human brain is better than anything at this. It's better than any machine. We talk about artificial intelligence, but again, it's very rote. It's much more rote processy based. We talk about machine learning, much more rote processy based. There's nothing like the human brain when it comes to high variance work. So let's put a seller in the seat now and say, okay, let's lay out all the work of the seller on a spectrum from low variance work to high variance work. What can we automate? For a seller, can we automate the ability to qualify a lead? Okay, so let's break down, what does it take to say that this lead would be qualified? What can a computer or a piece of software automate as part of that process? Okay, well, we could automate a questionnaire that could ask questions, that could pass the stage gate. We could file that in the CRM system, that could all live there. Great. But then on the higher end, a seller inferring that this person is interested in these things based on things I've talked to them about, and based on their complexity of their organization, and based on the timing and all these other factors that generally go into sales, that's still best equipped by a human brain understanding that, interpreting that, and driving actions. So as much as possible, you want software to be used to automate rote processes, and basically automate as much of the low variance work as possible. And you want a seller to be doing as much of the work on the higher end of
Mm-hmm.
variance.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you want systems to do around that is to collect and capture that, so that we know Danny Danny had that really good outbound call, or Danny had that really good objection handle. Let's make sure that we collect and capture that so we can train the next person, right?
Yep.
And the next person. Now, again, you'll hear people say, oh, well, let's take that amazing Danny and let's collect it all, and then we'll just automate Danny. But, good luck. And again, not just good luck, it's not going to happen. Danny's brain is still so complex and so interesting and so creative that is the value of the human, that just, computers are nowhere close to being able to automate.
Yep.
So put it out on a spectrum, automate the low end as much as possible. And as a young person, you should be demanding this in your job. You should not be doing rote processes. You should not be doing things that should be automated. You should be demanding your company automate those things. On the high end, continue to be a human, continue to draw inspiration from multiple places, and where possible, put systems in place to collect and capture as much of that so you can teach the rest of the organization how that's been done.
Yeah, that's a near perfect answer. It's something that I've thought about in my career very, very often, and you put it as eloquently as I've ever heard. So I really appreciate that spectrum, and where you automate and where you don't. And you can see it in one of our playbooks at Ramped, but it literally says micromanage the process, micromanage sales process, not people. And I think it's not the exact same, but it's a similar mindset of, you can't automate a person out of the system, but make sure the system is set up so the person can fly, can just succeed,
Yes.
and just run as fast as they want and as creatively as you want. I think that was the word, an operating word that you said often there, that creatively you're not going to replace it, you're not going to automate that away. There's no way today. It's I don't know. Yeah, I don't know when, but not for a while or ever.
Yep.
So, we look at Ramped, we look very critically at sales and the sales hiring process, and our passion is in sales. We feel very similarly that sales is not going anywhere. It's a massive, massive opportunity for young people. What do you think the future of sales looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I tend to look at sales through the lens of like B2B sellers. And, currently there's about 5 million B2B sellers out there, I believe. And I think ultimately that number is going to quickly go to 10 million. And so, if there's 5 million today, I think there'll be 10 million in the future, and in our future, and maybe even more. So I think the one, and this is great, I think, for people coming up in their careers, understand the market's going to grow, understand your skills are going to be more important, and as you grow into maybe more managerial type roles, your teams might be even larger, and your importance is even greater. In terms of the future, clearly, what I think I think the opportunity for the career-minded person is the entire sales model will change. And other than, again, the thing that won't change, which is the seller will stay in seat, all signals are pointing to amazing change. So we call it the 5 forces. I'll try to break it down really quickly for your audience, but I think it is really critical to understand just how much sales will change. The first force is this idea that increasingly the buyer is in control of the sales process. And you might say yeah, duh, but this is a very big change. When I started Percolate in 2011, I would say we had control. The vendor had control of the sales process. Our product was locked up. You couldn't use it until you purchased it. We had a lot of our information, our documentation, how we wanted you to use the product. Again, behind a paywall, you had to buy services for that.
Yep.
In the modern day, all of this information, in 10 years' time, all this information is now on the internet because of competitive pressures and market forces. You increasingly have to give your product away for free, have a trial, have a freemium product, and a proof of concept. So this idea that you're you can't touch it until you buy it, that's gone. As a seller, that's a big architectural shift, right? In terms of how you're thinking about qualification and how you're actually thinking about that customer journey. So that's the first one in terms of a force, right? Assume you have less control. Assume your buyer has way more control, and how are you going to manage that sales process? The second big shift is the idea that increasingly you can use data from your product or from your marketing website, your website, so to speak, to inform your sales process. And so understanding and being what I would call more product led in your sales motion than more sales led in your sales motion. So using this data that comes from the object that you actually sell to help you sell. The data here is just fantastic in terms of being able to close bigger deals, being able to close more efficient deals when you're using product data in your sales process. The challenge, of course, and where this really strikes the seller though, is potentially you have to think about your first deal being smaller. In the more traditional sales world, a lot of the funnel and dynamics of a funnel where you were going to qualify a customer down and you close them for the kind of the big deal, and then you moved on to the next customer. But increasingly, it looks like the customer is demanding to do a smaller deal, and then you can expand them along the way, right? So in software terms is called like net dollar retention, or this idea that your ability to expand a customer is really your opportunity, because most likely you're going to start them on a smaller deal. So again, most traditional, let's just call them old school sellers, do not think like this, but the newer generation is going to need to think like this, because you're most likely going to stay on a customer, develop a longer term relationship, and the gold is sort of at the end of this rainbow versus like in the initial product sell. The next big force for sellers is moving away from having to spend time in CRMs or systems of records, where what they're primarily expected to do are things that probably should be more automated, like fill out fields, like fill out call reports, fill out opportunities. That stuff should become more automated. We see technologies like Gong, which are now saying like, I don't have to take notes because I can just transcribe and it's going to help me understand what was important. Or tools like Clary, which just say like, based on all the data, I can start to infer where this opportunity stage is. First, the seller going in and manually entering it. So sellers will move their technological capabilities from things that are hopefully going to be more automated in systems of records to more systems of what I call collaboration. So the future, and a big part of the future work, I believe, are systems like Slack, where you have a much more collaborative architecture, where your systems are actually feeding into these meta work operating systems like Slack, and you're able to actually work across the company. So you're a seller, you need a resource, you need to show that resource why you need them. Here's an example of something a customer or prospect has done. Let's brainstorm around this, let's huddle around this so that I can get back to them very quickly. That entire model of collaboration is very, very different than the old world of working and how you had to work. And so that's something I just think is very, very important. And then the final force is basically and this is a little less for the seller, but increasingly the seller will qualify the lead more than the marketer, because increasingly we're moving into a privacy-led world where so much of marketing was about targeting third-party cookie data and other third-party data that they bought often from data brokers. That world is going away, because increasingly the larger platforms like Apple and Google are saying you can't do that. And so the only way to target and retarget your leads is to get them onto your website, get first-party data on them, what that's called, get them to even log in, and then interact with them. So that's another really big force, where the seller becomes much more important than, say, the marketer, because now they need to control that customer journey and get that customer actually to their website. And then the final force is the force we talked around originally, which is it's not a change, it's the same. You're in that seat, you're more important than ever, and get ready to make a ton of money as all these other four forces start to take hold.
Yeah. I mean, this is great. And we've been seeing it for, I would call it almost like 5 years, right? It's like this shift from like Wolf of Wall Street style sales, boiler room, Glenn Ross, Alec Baldwin, to almost like Steve Jobs, right? Or like a product person. I think of almost like Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky. Like he has so many podcasts that I found myself listening to more and more as sales has changed a bit on design mentality, product mentality versus what it used to be, which was like you got this list in front of you, dial down until someone answers, dial down, just close them, smooth talk your way into a deal. And frankly, like those days are gone almost.
Yes.
There's some industries where you could maybe get away with it, but they're pretty much dead. You have to sell with data, with empathy, robust and rich qualification, and all of this automated. So
Well, and yeah, this is the great renaissance for sales, like this time that we're living through. Like this is the, and let me just say one other thing, because and it's along what you're saying, but I think it's very important. Inside of organization, sales is often seen as the stupid function. Oh, sellers can't touch that data. They can't touch this. They can't touch that. Like they're just the guys that go out and club baby seals and get the deals done. And that is so wrong and
yeah,
so silly and so undermining to sellers. And what's crazy is if you look at the cost of goods sold of any company, the highest paid people are sellers.
yep,
Your highest paid people should be your best people, and they should be the people you should be giving them control of things. They should control data. Like why would you have a marketer control an account-based marketing workflow for a seller if that seller makes twice as much as that marketer? Like that, you should give that seller way more control of that process. And
yep,
of course, their compensation, of course, is much more based on their ability to actually get the deal closed. But in theory, if they're going to do that, they would make way more money. So this is the renaissance. Is the sellers are going to be more control. They're going to be able to touch more product. They're going to demand more product,
yep,
products and tools, and they're going to have to, of course, be ready for that. So they're going to have to understand how to orchestrate and be great with this. But I'm very confident the next generation of sellers can touch tools and will not have a problem with this. And that's also why so much of the next generation has the opportunity just to usurp the old generation and quickly take over leadership roles and bigger sales roles that maybe you would think in the past would take 10 to 15 years to actually acquire.
yeah. We speak the same language on it. I think that's true. And your point on your best and highest paid folks, or your highest paid folks should be the best folks. It rings true, right? In almost no other industry is it the case where your highest paid folks are looked at as like the ugly stepchild. It doesn't
Yes,
make any sense, right?
that's right. That's right.
It's not straightforward. Any professional organization, any professional sports organization, the highest paid folks are revered to like
That's right.
extremes almost.
That's
So
right.
it's very funny that it works out like that in sales, and I agree, it's shifting. So want to get out on one personal question at the end to shift away from workplace discussion and more on you. So one, well, where can folks find you? And two, leave them with your professional mantra, your workplace mantra or philosophy.
Yeah, sure. So where you can find me, just I'm James at variance.com. You can find me on Twitter, James underscore Gross, LinkedIn, or on our website, variance.com. My professional mantra, that's a great question. I think ultimately I'm an optimist. I believe the world is going to get better. But then I'm also a determinist, right? So I'm not indeterminate about that. I don't say that and think like, okay, all I got to do is sit back and it's going to get better. Um, I want to be a determinist, meaning I want to help make it better. I believe it's going to get better because I'm going to put everything I can into that, all my ambition, all my sweat, and all my grit into trying to make this place better. Because all history tells me when you take people that are passionate and ambitious and you give them runway, things can get a lot better. So my philosophy is just that, like, we can make things better, and we're going to make things better because we're determined to do it. And so I want to just be around people like that and constantly pushed by people like that. And I don't need cynical people around me. I don't need to, have people around me that like don't see the world as getting better. Not because it's fine that they have those point of view, but my philosophy is I want to surround myself with as many people that have that similar worldview of optimism and determinism, and I want to make things better with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very forward looking and also accountable, which is a trait that many of the best salespeople have ingrained in them. So that makes
Absolutely.
sense. That's straightforward. Well, James, thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. So many topics to cover that I think we agree and see pretty close to eye on, and I know our audience is going to absolutely love it. We'd love to have you back on at some point in the future. And for folks out there, check out Variance. Looks like an awesome tool that can really help salespeople. And thanks again for joining us on Workplace Disrupted, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thank you, Danny.